This is how I like to test if the mic works or not. I bring a rubber ducky whenever I do a talk. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Does anybody know the rubber ducky thing in software engineering? Hands up. Quite a few people, right? So like, I know we've got like ChatGPT and Claude Code to go back and forth with, but I'm a little bit old school when it comes to the rubber ducky. But secondarily, I also come from Switzerland, which means that going to therapy is quite expensive, and this tends to be a very apt replacement for that. But I'm hopefully going to bring some energy this morning. I think some of the hardest slots to have in speaking is first thing in the morning, and then right before lunch, and right after lunch. So generally, when a speaker's put like before, after lunch, it tends to be a compliment, and like speakers have to figure out that like, okay, it is a compliment. You've got to wake everyone up. It's the third day. Are we awake? Ooh, are we awake? That's what I like to hear. Okay, cool. Then I want to say, do we want to know how to make money? There's more excitement for waking up than about making money. What are we doing here? We're learning how to orchestrate payments for millions, not millions of rupees, millions of dollars. It's gonna make a little bit of a difference. Cool. Anyways, we'll get into it. So a little bit of an introduction of who I am. My name is Faris. I'm a staff software engineer at Small PDF. Has anyone heard or used Small PDF before? Has anyone paid for Small PDF before? You've actually paid? You're the second person I've met here that's paid. The last person that I met was Will Sentence yesterday, and we just sat and had a chat, and I was just like, oh yeah, I work at Small PDF. He's like, no, I've been paying, and he showed me invoices. And so you two I have to thank for contributing towards my salary. But yeah, so that's that. I also love work. I've worked in the connected TV space previously. I've worked on Discovery Plus as a platform, Eurosport for the 2020 Olympics, GCN, fitness applications, financial technology, so on and so forth, growth teams. Fun fact, before software engineering, I used to be actually a CrossFit athlete and a trainer. I was preparing to be competitive for the CrossFit Games. Anyone here done CrossFit before? Have you regretted it? You haven't regretted it? That's tough. I'm also a Raycast ambassador. Any Raycast users? No? We gotta change that. Raycast is like, there's no excuse now. You got Raycast on iOS, on Windows. I don't get paid to say this. It is absolutely fantastic replacement for your Spotlight search on your MacBook or whatever you're doing on Windows. I'm also the co-founder of Zurich.js. We'll talk about that towards the end. And then I'm also a Stripe community builder. And I want to start a little bit with a story time. And something that was actually quite interesting when I came to Athens, and I had a bit of an experience that complemented my talk. The first question I want to ask is, has anyone here used Revolut before? Revolut, right? When Revolut came out, it was so novel in the concept that it allowed us for the first time to exchange money so easily and so cheaply compared to what we were used to traditionally. Whenever you would have a credit card of some sort, you would have to look up that confusing sheet of like, what is the exchange rate that I have to pay? What's the fee that I have to pay? Then there are additional fees that come on top. And all of a sudden, something that you'd pay for 10 euros ended up costing you 20. And that confusion wasn't a great experience when it comes to going through transactions for goods and services. And so when Revolut came about, it was so fantastic. I had the same exchange rate as Google. I'd just look up euros to Swiss francs, and whatever I got there was the exchange rate I was going to have. And so how do they do this and still make a profit? And I think their revenue is up in the billions by now. And they do this using something called liquidity pooling, where they have very large source accounts is what we call them. Let's imagine I come from Switzerland, we use Swiss francs as a currency over here. In Greece, it's euros. Imagine that I have a large $1 million account of Swiss francs. I wish it belonged to me, but it belongs to Revolut. And then there's a large account of €1 million in there. And they have internal ledgers where they assign, hey, these 5 euros belong to Faris, then these 10 Swiss francs belongs to somebody else. Now, when I wanted to come over to Greece, I'm not going to use Swiss francs. I'm going to do a foreign exchange of some sort. So what they would do over here is that, let's say I wanted to exchange 100 Swiss francs into euros, they'd find somebody or a collection of other transactions that are doing the reverse and switch the numbers internally. So the numbers would actually never leave the account. Or if there was a remainder in that amount, then it would actually go to the FX exchange, and then there'd be a fee on a much smaller amount than a larger amount. All that's to say, that moving money around and payments is incredibly complex. And I wish I took a photo of this yesterday because I was walking through Syntagma Square on the way over here, and I saw a busker. And they actually not only accept PayPal, they accept PayPal and credit card, and we'll talk about why that's important, and I found that really, really interesting. Now, to the story time over here. Now, at Small PDF, we had a fun little incident a couple of months ago. What was happening is that somebody in the non-technical department, the non-engineering department, what they were doing is that at 9 p.m. at night, they were going through old employee accounts. And there were people that had left the company. There were layoffs at some point in time, many, many years ago, and they were like, why do we still have Google accounts and other accounts for people that aren't here anymore? So we want to just open up those seats and give them to somebody else. And in doing so, they actually deleted an account where our Braintree is the PayPal payment processor, API keys were associated with, which meant that when the account was deleted, our API keys were deleted. And we saw this lovely graph over here that shot up. Now, Small PDF has 20, 30 million users per month. When you ship a problem into production, you tend to notice pretty fast, and it tends to be pretty stressful. You'll see there's this Braintree token fetch error. Essentially, the token was not valid anymore. And so we had very quickly a shoot up of 3,208 errors impacting 1,420 users. And these were users that actually wanted to pay. The token part actually happens when you want to subscribe to the platform. So that means that every single error contributes to a loss in subscriptions. And so we look at a Datadog dashboard, and this is the Datadog dashboard for what we call for subscriptions created. So once you actually go through the process of creating a subscription, we log something so that maybe we can debug something later down the line. And that exact same thing, the opposite happened. It crashed all the way down. You'll see there's some recovery a little bit towards the end, and what we're talking about today is going to contribute to why that recovery exists. But I would say that's a bit of a catastrophic failure, wouldn't we agree? Would anybody like to have this graph at work? It's a fun graph to look at, right? Something that's also interesting is that, and I can even show this later, at Small PDF, because of the amount of users we have, in a given week, we could have 800,000 errors processed through our observability tooling. 800,000 errors. In 24 hours, we can even see 120,000 errors. Anybody really fast at reading? Anybody have luck reading through that many errors in a day, even if you have 20 people looking at it at the same time? It's not possible. So you have to rely on anomaly-based detection, which is something, a trend that changes, that surfaces that something is different from what happened previously. But how can we surface trends? If you think of anomaly detection as being subject to, let's say you have a sea of errors, and you throw a rock, and there are ripples in the sea with waves and so on and so forth. It's incredibly hard to see the ripples from a rock. The rock is the incident. And when you have 120,000 errors in a 24-hour period, 1,300 of those that we saw previously, or even 3,000 of those, won't surface an anomaly. Because 3,000 errors compared to the 120K that actually happen aren't enough to trigger an alert system. And so we'll also talk about how do we create ponds that we can actually, so instead of a sea, when you throw a rock into a pond, you'll see the ripples. How do we create ponds for detection if there are issues and create segmentations in our alerts so that we know when a specific thing is going wrong and we're consuming less information to be able to detect these anomalies. But if you're good at math, which I am not, you'll have, the incident was from 9 p.m. till 10 a.m., and that's 12 hours of downtime. That is a long time to be down for payments. With a platform that operates 24/7 and is accepting payments when we're asleep, that's a really painful place to be. Especially, well, sometimes you have global teams. You have a team based in Singapore, a team based in the US. Small PDF is just pretty much based in Europe. And so we like to go to sleep. I'm sure a lot of people do like sleep. Nobody likes PagerDuty alerts in the middle of the night. We had that for 12 hours of downtime. And that kind of accounted for $5,000 to $10,000 in missed subscriptions. That's not a great place to be, and it's not even the absolute number of 5 to 10K in lost subscriptions. A majority of those people may not even attempt to, try and subscribe again because they've lost trust in the service. There was something going wrong there. And we're going to change that entire experience. To understand that, we have to understand a little bit of the struggles of payments. We alluded to that a little bit before with the whole Revolut problem. There's the currency and foreign exchange fee thing, where does anybody like paying in a, like, if you're over here, like, let's say you have a Netflix subscription, right? And you're in Greece, you normally expect to pay in euros. If the Netflix subscription is in dollars, would you have a little bit more hesitation in paying for it versus euros? Generally, yes. You'd pull up a calculator and be like, okay, what's the conversion rate? How much am I paying with my card? So on and so forth. It's a little bit more of a frustrating user experience. And so you want to be able to support local currencies and be able to absorb foreign exchange fees. So you don't want to have to pass that burden on to your users. A big thing around that is if you're accepting in your platform euros as a currency, and the bank account your company has is in dollars, even you as a company have to do the exchange rate under the hood, even if your user is paying in their local currency. So even managing settlement accounts, the account that the money is settled into, is an important consideration to not have your business pay the fees instead of your end users. Then there's that optimizing payment methods per country. And it's so interesting that yesterday when I saw that Busker have PayPal and credit card payments, what were they optimizing for? If I don't have a credit card, but I have PayPal, at least I can pay. Vice versa, if I don't have PayPal and I have credit card, I can support whatever he's doing. And so even the buskers figured out that just like a global SaaS, it's going to help his conversion rate for getting a little bit more money during the day if he has multiple payment methods. And in Switzerland, that payment method is Twint. Has anyone heard of Twint before? Right? Because that's part of the local ecosystem that exists over there. It's a QR code-based payment method. The same exact thing exists in Thailand. Thailand also has a QR code-based payment system, but it's an entirely different infrastructure. So I can't carry over my Swiss-based QR code-based payment system and use it in Thailand, which is really interesting because the same experience is now driven entirely differently based on the region. In Brazil, you have Pix bank transfers. Now, with Pix bank transfers, and some of my Brazilian friends have told me this, what's really interesting here is that when COVID happened and the government had to disperse, certain funds and aids during that period of time, you actually had to have a Pix account to receive that money. So it's not even about being able to pay for subscriptions, but also receiving government funds. And that's also based on the local financial infrastructure. For India, it's UPI, Unified Payments Interface. 86% more usage in India than credit card. So you're not tapping into a market at all if you're not optimizing for that payment method. And we'll talk about how UPI is a really interesting case also towards the end because it's quite complex to integrate. And then in the Netherlands, there's Ideal Payments. And actually this year, they're transitioning from Ideal Payments to another one called Wero. And so an entire region's transitioning how they pay. And if companies do not adapt, they're going to introduce friction to their flows. So they might actually see an impact in conversion, not because the product's changed, but because the local region has changed the way they pay for subscriptions. And to give a little bit of a use case of this, last year we had introduced Alipay as a payment method. So AliExpress, Alibaba, Alipay, it's a wallet-based payment method that exists in China. And with no change to the product itself, just introducing the payment method, we saw a 3.5x increase in annual recurring revenue in China. You just add a payment method, a single button. We love doing that as front-end engineers. We love adding buttons, and we make more money that way. But it's interesting that adapting for the local market made such a difference rather than maybe saying that, okay, users in China wanted a particular feature. That's important too, but making that platform accessible from a payments perspective. There's also, beyond that, regulation and compliance. This gets really, really complicated because you have to follow the local laws of every single region you want to operate in. You have cases where you have sanctioned countries and restricted transactions. So with wars going on or with fraudulent transactions going through one bank, or for example, when Credit Suisse went down in Switzerland, I'm not sure how that impacted all the transactions being routed through that bank. And so being able to stop operating from a payments perspective in a certain region can really help your ratings from a dispute fraud perspective to make sure that your payment providers don't actually eject you from their ecosystem. So let's say in Switzerland at some point there's some geopolitical situation that results in it being a sanctioned country, you should be able to flip a button and not flip a switch and not be able to operate payments in Switzerland anymore. And so what we do in Small PDF, for example, is if we are operating in a sanctioned country, we still want users to use the platform. That's not necessarily a problem, but accepting payments are. So we just provide all pro functionality for free in that case. That gives us the SEO advantage because people are still searching and using for the platform. We gain that the second we can flip back the switch and it's no longer a sanctioned country, we can start monetizing again. Then about having no local business entity in a region can also mean no payments. So for UPI in India, you need a local business entity. And now it's very expensive to actually go and open up a business entity in every region that you want to operate in. All of a sudden, if you want to accept payments in Switzerland, does that mean you have to open up a company in Switzerland? That's a lot of work, especially if you don't have a legal department. So what is the solution for this? If Stripe is the payment processors, everyone heard of Stripe before, right? It's been around for a long, long time. So Stripe is the payment processor. They have other functionalities you can bolt on, but at its base, Stripe allows you to just process payments. If you don't want to accept taxes as part of those payments, or handle discounts or billing or whatever, you don't have to. If you want, then Stripe actually acquired a company called Lemon Squeezy a couple of years ago, and there's an equivalent company. There's also Paddle and other ones, and those are actually merchant of records. So merchant of records are another layer on top of a PSP, a payment service provider, that handle all the compliance for you. So just like Deal and Remo First are employer of record companies, they allowed in COVID especially to hire multiple people in other regions by having the HR departments based in the local region that they wanted to hire. They were your employer on record. Merchant of records like Lemon Squeezy and Paddle, for example, they allow you to operate and be your merchant on record. So they handle all the tax burden, all the paperwork, and everything like that. You'll pay a much higher fee as a result, but you won't have to think about that. So if, for example, you're vibe coding an application, you want to ship it really fast, you don't want to think about the compliance problems because the tax thing is going to bite you back really fast in a couple of months, you can actually use something called polar.sh, I think that's the website, and they're a brand new player on the game, and they're a merchant of record, and I think they say that you can integrate payments in just 6 lines of code, and all of a sudden, you've shipped an application you can monetize, you don't have to think about it, whereas Stripe is a little bit more of an integrated process, especially at an enterprise level. So we already talked about country-level compliance. I want to talk a little bit about the US, because funnily enough, this has been the project that I've been working on for the past couple of months, and it's been a lot of fun. Can anyone guess how many tax jurisdictions there are in the US? And you can shout, that's totally okay, I can work with it. 40, that's a good guess. 1 for each state. Any other guesses? Let's be outrageous. 127. If this was a lottery, I wish you could win something for that, but it's a little bit closer to 11,000. There are 11,000 more than 11,000 separate tax jurisdictions that exist in the US. Now, we've been working really hard with the LLMs at Small PDF to generate the largest switch case statement that exists on the planet to be able to cover all. No. With the 11,000 tax jurisdictions, it is nearly impossible to just code that into your application because not only do you have those 11,000 jurisdictions, first of all, they change at the street level. You can walk to another street, the tax changes. Because they operate with something called nexus. And nexus is this concept where the amount of essentially financial, nexus is essentially the amount of financial transactions that go through a certain tax jurisdiction before it is taxable for a product. So to explain nexus in a couple of other ways is that, let's say for region A or jurisdiction A, you have 200,000 in ARR or subscriptions that you're processing. At that threshold, nexus applies and you start being tax applicable. In other jurisdictions, it could be the type of product that you sell. If you're selling cars, it's tax applicable. If you're selling paper, there's no taxes to be paid. They're different product types. For other ones, it's a threshold of total revenue. So you pay nothing from your first dollar, but the second you go above $500,000, you pay everything after that. So for each jurisdiction, you can't just say there's a standard tax percentage that applies. Each jurisdiction reaches nexus at a different point. And so that's something that you can't even simplify from a perspective of, oh, whenever we do our checkout, let's just use geolocation to figure out what their zip code is, and that's easy enough. You actually start to add friction into the process. And we ran an experiment where just adding 2 fields in our checkout, so adding the zip code field and the address field, reduced conversion by 11%. So if we were making $1 million a year in the US, just adding 2 compliance fields, let alone the fact that you're adding tax on top, costs us over 100 grand. And so you have to figure out what are the other things you can leverage to up that conversion to compensate for all of that. Now there's also chargebacks and disputes. Has anyone ever started a subscription with one of those virtual credit cards or then put a reminder in their calendar where they did the free trial? Free trial is 7 days long, 6th day I put a calendar reminder, I have to cancel this trial. Am I the only person that's done that? Who else has done that? We love doing that, right? Businesses hate that. Why? Because sometimes we forget that we had to cancel that subscription. This happened to me yesterday, but I didn't actually do what I'm going to say what I want to talk about. What happens is that you pay for the subscription and you're like, shoot, $40 just left my account. $40 left my account, so I'm going to tell Revolut or I'm going to tell my bank, that was a fraudulent transaction. That I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't me. That was somebody else. That was Patricia. So when that happens, that's a dispute. And so not only does, if the business loses the dispute, do they have to refund the amount, they probably pay a $20 penalty on top. There's also a dispute rate, where if you reach a certain threshold of a dispute rate, Stripe's going to say, we're not doing business with you anymore. Have fun. Pull the plug. If you're making 10 million a year, and you're all dependent on Stripe, and they pull the plug, you're not having a good afternoon. The last thing I'll touch on before we go into more stuff about what the solution to all of these problem spaces are, I'm not just here to depress you about the problems, I'm here to also figure out how can we solve this together, is reliability and uptime. And so when we talk about reliability and uptime, we generally talk about availability and nines. Like how many nines do you have in your availability? Can anyone guess in 5 nines? I'm showing 3 nines over here. So 3 nines gives you 8 hours and 45 minutes of allowed downtime per year. How much do you think 5 nines allows you? Quick math. Random guesses. 1 hour. That's a good guess. 5 minutes and 16 seconds. Does anyone's build pipeline finish in less than that? Yeah. So if you are a financial institution, you generally either have an EMI license, an electronic money license, or a banking license. And if you have to abide by 5 nines. If you break your SLAs, you actually have to report that. And you may have your license revoked. And it's really interesting because Stripe boasts 5-9 availability. And so I was having a look at their status, dashboard and seeing what were the last errors what were the errors in the last year? Did they actually uphold that 5-9 availability? So we saw their elevated PayPal errors, and that lasted for an hour and a half. That's fail. Elevated bank contact errors, 45 minutes, fail. Elevated API errors for 2 hours, fail. But they still boast 5 nines. And so you got to beg the question, how can they do that? Or how do most of these companies do that? Because 5 nines is that Stripe was working and the API was working. The platform was up. But the downstream payment provider like PayPal, maybe they were having issues. But you, as a business, don't necessarily care if Stripe is up or not. You need PayPal to be able to accept transactions. That's what you're using as a payment method. And so you can't just blindly follow that 5-9 availability. If we look at PayPal, for example, they had 8 hours of errors. So even if we didn't kill that API key by mistake and PayPal's having an outage, there's nothing we can do for 8 hours. And so we're just losing tens of thousands, and we can't do anything about it until we think about payment orchestration. Now, orchestration is not a new concept in engineering. We orchestrate a bunch of things, API gateways and so on and so forth. This is just bringing that concept from a perspective of payments. And it's like air traffic control. You're trying to route payments for the best route in terms of cost, speed, and reliability. And so this concept is not a new one. This has existed for probably 10 years by now. And there are actually companies, there are APIs like Primer that allow you to do this. Now, I haven't seen this before, but the way we implemented it at Small PDF is actually bringing a backend concept and implementing it on the front end. Because traditionally, what you'd do is you'd send a request to a payment API, and you'd be like, hey, Primer, just deal with this. I don't know how the payment's going to be routed. But what changes if we were to bring that to the front end and make use of all that beautiful reactivity we have these days with React and all the frameworks? And so the goal with orchestration is manage multiple payment providers with one singular system. We already talked about we're trying to route based on, let's say, 3 simple criteria: cost, region, and success rate. And we use this all to reduce that single point of failure that we talked about. If our dispute rate goes too high with Stripe, if PayPal is down, we have options that we can work with. And it really allows us to optimize payment methods per country for much higher success rates. And I want to demonstrate this a little bit using this table over here. So if we take 2 payment providers, Revolut and Stripe, it's not about just the fact that both of them may support the same payment methods or the same currencies, but if we look at 2 overlapping countries that they both support. So they support the United Kingdom and France. Revolut and Stripe both support them. So for the Stripe fees, just from a fee perspective, you have 1.5% as a fee and 0.2 pence. Revolut, for the exact same transaction, will charge you 1% and 2 pence. Why would you put the transaction through Stripe? Just use Revolut. You've charged your end user the same amount and you're saving money on your end. France, 2.5% on Stripe, flat 1% with Revolut. We have a clear winner here. Now, in the case of Cyprus and Estonia, Stripe doesn't even operate there, which means that if you wanted to expand into those regions, you have no choice but to use Revolut. If you used Stripe, that's it. You can't expand your business there. And so this doesn't only allow you to optimize the fee level, now you get to have more expansion globally. And so whatever the fee is, you're going to go with Revolut here. And now the same thing gets flipped around for Stripe. Stripe operates in the US and Canada. Revolut does not. So no matter if the fees are higher or not at 2.9%, you're going to go with Stripe. And so you start to look at things in terms of maybe Stripe supports more payment methods that Revolut does. Then there's the currency problem. Then there's the regional support, success rates, so on and so forth. And then you can start mixing and matching depending on your company's requirements. And so what does the front-end architecture for this look like? And you can apply most of this to the back end too. A lot of these concepts are just agnostic. You start with a user opening up a checkout. At some point, they want to pay for something. When they open up a checkout, you'll initialize an orchestration layer. And why are we keeping this a little bit vague? It's because this orchestration layer is a set of rules and logic that you develop for yourself and your business. You have to A/B test this over time. You consume global state and a rules configuration. And this rules configuration is where am I routing what transaction through what payment provider. For example, we're going to consume 3 pieces of information in our global state. It's going to be the user's country, a set of A/B tests that we're currently running, and a currency list that we want to support. We'll take that and we'll run it through a decision tree, and then we'll prioritize PSPs. Why are we prioritizing PSPs? Because if one is failing, you fall back to another one. And let's bring a bit more of a visual example over here. Let's say we want to accept payments in China. How would we go about prioritizing that? What would that decision tree look like if we have 3 payment providers? We have Stripe, Revolut, and Adyen. Stripe supports Alipay and Chinese currency, local currency, Chinese yuan. That sounds great for our use case. Revolut only accepts credit card in US dollars. So at the payment method level and at the currency level, it's not ideal. Adyen supports credit card, not great for operating in China, but it does support the local currency. So all of a sudden, we've created a priority list where Stripe is the first payment provider I'm going to use to process this transaction. If Stripe is failing, I'm going to reactively switch to Adyen, and we're going to process the transaction that way. And so, anyone here a React developer? Cool, because I'm not going to go too much through this because I appreciate I'm at a conference where mostly it's Java folk. And so to very simply explain this, in the front end, we have these components that have to pass context. These are context providers. And so when you're creating a checkout with a payment provider, they provide these SDKs with these context providers. And you have this Stripe provider, and that's just providing information to your checkout on how to process this transaction or give it utility functions to be able to do something. In a multi-provider world, you're usually sandwiching these and you're saying that, hey, here's the Stripe one, here's the Adyen one, here's the Revolut one, and the checkout figures out that confusion, and you're loading a bunch of stuff into the checkout and bloating it up. And that's definitely not what you want to do. When you're talking about context providers, you want to consume that state, and you want to figure out before the user opens up the checkout, which is the gateway you want to selectively load. You want to lazy load that. None of that information wants to stay there. You want to load the chunks once you made the decision, and then you render that provider. So same when it comes to processing the transaction itself. Each SDK, each hook that's provided for these payment providers have a different way of understanding what a payment is. For Stripe, it's Stripe.process payment maybe, and it's passing amount and currency. For Adyen, maybe it's submit payment with a value and currency code. And so each one has a different language, different syntax for doing the same thing. And you want to get rid of that whole concept and make your front end agnostic. Your front end or your back end should only care that I need to make a payment. And then everything needs to use adapters under the hood to figure out where it's routing that payment. If we were to look a little bit at the rules configuration that we talked about, now this is a lot of code to digest, so we're going to read it together. This is a config for Stripe. You have an enablement criteria that exists, and so it defines in what case are things enabled. It tries to use an SQL-esque syntax in the way that we use only in or in to define different conditions so you can mix and match stuff with and ors. So for Stripe, we want to only operate in China, only if the Stripe A/B test is on. We don't care about the currencies, and then we list payment methods. Alipay is what we have available, and we want to use that in China, and then we just associate the SDK's payment provider and say that whenever Stripe has figured out that it wants to load, use that stuff and lazy load that. Let's say we wanted to add a brand new payment method. If we want to add PayPal, we just add US to the list because we want to use that in the US. We just add a payment method called PayPal. We say that's in the US, and in 7 lines of code, you've added a brand new payment method and you don't have to do anything else. And we'll see a little bit of a demo of that. And this is, I think, sits pretty close to infrastructure as code when you're thinking about Terraform and so on and so forth. The way I like to represent this is a little bit more as payments as code, where the benefits of that is that you get to version control your payments configuration. Traditionally, doing this would mean you'd go in your Stripe dashboard or your payment dashboard and you'd design workflows and you'd say, this condition, do that, route it this way, and you'd use an audit log after the fact to see if something was messed up. Version controlling it means you can actually say, oh, this commit started to mess with our conversion rate, let's switch things back. You can unit test your payments configuration that wouldn't have been possible before. You can A/B test at scale with cost efficiency because driving the A/B test system on the front end using local storage is a lot cheaper than making API requests to external services like Growthbook or LaunchDarkly. And especially with a scale of small PDF, that's not something that's feasible even if you use caching. If we look at a case study of a 10 million ARR SaaS, and let's just estimate that they operate 24/7 and they generate around $1,140 of revenue per hour. And yes, there's seasonality in times where there are more payments and less, but this is around about the average. If they have 3/9 availability, they're allowed that 8 hours and 45 minutes of downtime per year, which means that if you're down for that period and you retain that SLA, you've lost around 10K per year. Maybe if you're making 10 mil, 10K is not a big deal. But when you implement orchestration, you don't have to just think about the fact that you are improving the availability aspect. You have to think about the uplift. If you're thinking about integrating Pix in Brazil versus credit card, not only do you increase conversion by 5 to 15%, you also reduce credit card fees by 2 to 4%. So you're saving money at the fee level, currency level, uplift in terms of the payment method level, and saving on the availability level. And so the amount tends to be a lot more. Want to see a demo? Woo! Cool. So we're going to open up small PDF. We're going to open up the checkout, create an account, and first we're going to see in the UK, you see British pounds, we actually have Recurly being loaded over here. So you're seeing PayPal and credit card as options. Wonderful. That's what we want to use in the UK. Now let's go and switch things around a little bit. Let's switch things to China, refresh, and PayPal's not supported in China, so we only have credit card as an option. Not ideal because we want to use Alipay. Let me look at the Stripe feature flag or A/B test, flip it on, we reactively loaded Stripe, and now Alipay is supported as a payment method. If I switch to the US, still using Stripe, now it's PayPal, card, and Google Pay. And if we were to go and then turn off the Stripe feature flag, we'll then switch back to using Recurly, maintaining mostly the same payment methods except for Google Pay. Now, if we were to go and switch things to Germany, Germany prefers SEPA-based payments with IBANs, so you actually have direct debit as an option. And we'll explore a little bit how that can be quite complicated to handle. And then finally, what's the next mystery country? We'll go into India. And when you see India, you'll see that credit card is being loaded, but the border radius is a little bit different. This is how you'll be able to tell that I spent too much time looking at this checkout. But it's actually loading Adyen under the hood. Now, both Braintree and Recurly and Adyen support credit card. So why are we using a different gateway but the same payment method? The success rate based on how Adyen just has their infrastructure in India is much higher with the same payment method. You just are using a different gateway. So even retaining the same payment method but switching gateways can make a very, very big difference. Now, using this reactive system to be able to lazy load your payment providers meant that we could actually drop our bundle size by 70% for our checkout, which in and of itself, from a performance improvement, increased conversion. To talk a little bit about edge cases, I've got 3-4 minutes left. One thing is payment method reordering. Now, what's interesting with Stripe is that Stripe has its own way of figuring out what order of payment methods that it wants to show you. When you're looking up something in Google, 30% of users go to the first result. They don't care about anything else after that. And the same case is for your payment methods. Now, Stripe's figured out the optimal ordering, but let's say you've run a bunch of A/B tests and you've figured out a better ordering for your use case. Now, using these orchestration rules, you can configure those custom orderings for every single gateway. When it comes to SEPA payments, that's also a really interesting case because with credit card payments, most of the settlement times are within 24 hours. You may have made a credit card payment before, and then in your credit card app, you see that it's grayed out for a short period of time because it's still trying to settle the amount that's being transacted, and then the business can confirm, the merchant can confirm if it received the amount on the other end. 24 hours is absolutely fine because when you're starting using a product, you can give a grace period of 24 hours. For 24 hours, we have no idea whether the money's gone through or not, but we're generally fine doing that. SEPA payments, IBAN-based payments, it can take 5 to 6 days to settle. It depends. What if you did it on the weekend? If you did it on the weekend, the banks are closed. They're not going to transact. And so you actually have to change your product's grace period to maybe 6 days as a result of the payment method that was used. So all of a sudden, your product's functionality and business logic changes depending on how users paid for it. There's tax inclusivity and exclusivity. Over here in Europe, we're very used to paying with tax inclusive. The number you see is the number you pay. In the US, tax exclusivity. So over there in the US, when I see a price and I go to the checkout, they've added sales tax on top. And so again, you want to be able to A/B test or introduce different pricing logic depending on the region you're operating in. When it comes to UPI in India, that's also a really interesting payment method case because they have a 15,000 rupee threshold on mandate behavior. Mandate behavior is essentially when I start a subscription with UPI, I will get a notification on my phone. A little bit similar to 3DS, but the functionality and the purpose is different, where I have to confirm, did I want to go through with this subscription? Now, if the subscription cost is above 15K INR, every single month or billing cycle, the user will get a notification. It's like, do you still want this subscription? And they have 60 minutes to approve that. So no matter what you're doing, you got 60 minutes, whether you're eating lunch, whether you're swimming, whether you're at the gym, you've got a timer going on whether you have to continue your subscriptions or not. If you're at 14K INR, that doesn't exist. They don't have to reapprove that every single time. And so the friction changes entirely. You also have to support pause and resume functionality. In their UPI apps, they can click and say, for small PDF, I want to pause the subscription right now. And then the application has to react to that with webhooks. That doesn't exist for other payment methods. You have to now adapt your functionality as a result. Now, with the last 40 seconds I have, what about when things go wrong? Anomaly detection, that's what we talked about before. Allowing this orchestration to happen means you can start segmenting your alerts or your logs by currency, gateway, and country. And when, especially in Datadog, you're 15 minutes away from detecting a metric deviation if you pull your logs up correctly. And let's say we got an alert. We got an alert that Braintree payments are failing in Switzerland. What do we do here? Let's open up the checkout, and we have Recurly, we have PayPal, and credit card. Things are failing, so I'm just going to go in the code really quickly, and I'm going to go and add CH, Switzerland. I'm going to go add that, refresh. We've loaded Stripe. Done. But we had PayPal before, so I still want to have parity across my payment methods. Let me quickly go in the list of payment methods and just say, hey, for PayPal, I want to support Switzerland too. And we've got PayPal. So in 30 seconds, you just switched gateways, and you're essentially operational back in 10 minutes, and your only limiting factor is your build pipeline. So what if we could safely simulate this? And I don't have enough time to show that. It's chaos engineering and game days. And so what I did is that we could vibe code an application really, really quickly with that payments configuration, and you can actually display, if I change the configuration of my payments, what will be resolved in the UI. And so you can actually play a couple of games with your team and see, oh, in scenario A, we had these failures. How quick can you get back up to live? And you can play those based on your high ARR countries. And so when you're up at 3 a.m. because you've got a PagerDuty alert, you don't even have to think about it. It's muscle memory, and you're back to operational. So instead of 12 hours, we've solved the problem in 10 minutes and 30 seconds. And when I don't have time to demo that, I want to thank you for your time. So, one more thing I wanted to mention, because Pat gave me permission to do this. I run Zurich.js, and this year we announced conf.zurichjs.com, and I want to raffle a ticket if anybody wants it. We are flying out Daniel Rowe, who leads the Nuxt core team, Dominic Dorfmeister from Tanstack Query, Ramona Schwering, who's awesome in the world of security, Scott Talinsky, who does Syntax FM, Tejas Kumar, known in the world of AI, and we've got a bunch more speakers that we're announcing, like Kevin Powell, Debbie O'Brien, so on and so forth. And we actually just booked a Zurich lakeside venue for an after party, which will be a lot of fun. So if you scan that QR code over there and you throw your email in there, at some point I'll run that through one of them spinning wheels, and then I will issue you a ticket to come to Zurich.js. And then if anybody else doesn't make it, I'm going to shoot you all a discount in any case. So yeah, thank you for your time.